When I was a kid, and I mean a very little kid, I probably learned to read off the back of cereal boxes. Most cereals were putting on their back panel baseball cards for 3 years, and they ran from the 1960 season to the 1962 season. That was 3 years of guys from both leagues. I'd do 100 cards from either league, and I was by today's standards, such a sheltered child that many of you would just not believe how clueless I was about things like race. But we didn't talk about people being different because of their skin color in my house. Now, we had neighbors next door, and that's where I first heard the N word, but the kid next door would use it on his big sister when she frustrated him, which was quite frequent. And in that context, it didn't really click with me that that had anything to do with race. Obviously, in his house, he had heard that word as a term that you use to revile somebody when you're really disgusted with that person. So his little sister generally got the benefit of that. That was kind of weird, but we didn't use that word in our house. And when I was looking at my baseball cards, I saw young men who were, and these were my heroes, I guess I was, I don't know, 5, 6 years old. This is reflecting too much for, I don't know if you can see Willie Mays there. Some of the guys, there's one, Marichal, on the other side, they were just, there's Cepeda up in the corner. The Hispanics usually were a little darker, but there's Sam Jones right in the middle. And they said of old sad Sam Jones that when the team was doing spring training in Florida, Sam could go into the restaurants with the white guys because he could, as they say, he could pass. His skin color was so light that nobody thought that he wasn't white. And again, as a kid, I would look at these guys and it didn't register to me that there was any difference there other than some guys are tall and some guys are short, and some guys, maybe their eyes kind of slant, and some guys have big ears or whatever. I remember a guy by the name of Bill Bruton, who was the first player of African origin on the Milwaukee Braves. I think they were still the Boston Braves when he came up, and he became the mentor of Henry Aaron and Wes Covington and a lot of the younger guys. Billy looked to me as a kid like me, like my family. He didn't, the skin color, and these were, you can tell, they were color photos, but you couldn't really tell by looking at him that his race was, I couldn't, that it was any different from mine. And there are a few points that I want to make about this. That's why I'm beginning this really prickly discussion going back to my childhood. I guess one thing I've already said, one major point that we learn about race in our immediate environment. Of course, we pick up things from our culture, but even more than that, I think we pick up things in our household. Our mother or father, the people that are immediately around us, condition us to notice these things or not notice them. And in my household, as I said, we didn't use disparaging words like that. We didn't talk about it. I didn't notice stuff like that until I went on to school and was in the broader cultural context, and then I heard people talking about it. But another point that I want to make is that every group of people, if you put them on a spectrum, they have characteristics that cover the whole spectrum. If you want to emphasize nose or eye, are they slanting, are they straight, are they broad, are they set close together, nose, lips, ears, there's a disparity in any given group. There are Caucasian people. Some have big noses, some have small noses. There are people of Asian origin whose eyes do not slant necessarily, who don't have high cheekbones. People of African origin don't necessarily have features of a certain kind. I was talking about skin color a minute ago, and actually that leads to another point here. Besides people whose DNA is from that common pool, nevertheless having a broad range of particular features, you also have different DNA pools constantly throughout history and the vast, vast prehistory of our species mingling. So in the case of, say, black people who pass as white people, well, they most likely have some Caucasian DNA in their veins. And why is that to be viewed as irregular? All of us in our past have different groups in our veins. Why is it that we associate red hair with the Irish? That's actually Scandinavian. But when the Vikings raided even more than Ireland, northern Scotland, the Hebrides, those features became integrated into the peoples of Gaeldom. But actually the Celts are more dark. They're short people. They tend to be. They have dark eyes. They have dark hair. Do you know that some of us, and I would guess just by studying my own characteristics, I've never had my DNA tested, but I think I'm probably about 3%. Some of us are as much as 5% Neanderthal. So we're not even completely Homo sapiens. And I guess you could throw that as a slur, but the whole thing about Neanderthals being hunched over and having the bent back was based upon a misidentification of a skeleton back in the 19th century as a typical Neanderthal skeleton. It was an individual that was diseased with arthritis. So Neanderthals actually had a larger ratio of cerebral, of skull size to spinal length, which would indicate that they may have been more intelligent than Homo sapiens. And they probably died out for a combination of factors, but one of which was that they simply interbred with Homo sapiens. So we're such a mix. All of us are such a mix. Scientifically, the whole idea of race is very dubious. You could make the case that there's really no such thing as race. You could go down as I said, you could check all the boxes and, okay, this one has this kind of nose and these ears and this skin color, but you can take that group and find a wide disparity within those items that you just checked. So race is really more than a scientific construct. It's something that comes out of our social situations, and especially I think when we have some tensions that make us think tribally, they make us want to divide against each other. This is where the subject of racism creeps in, although even there I think we should be talking about bigotry more than racism, and I'll get to that distinction in just a second. But you know, in times of economic hardship, when you have a bunch of, especially blue-collar workers competing for just a few jobs, if there's a certain group that has visible, physically identifiable distinctions from the more mainstream group, the larger group, then often the larger group will zero in on those distinctions and they'll take out their frustration. Remember, these are people who are trying to feed their families, and they're maybe getting undercut by these other people. They may be immigrants or whatever who are working for less money. So they're very, you can understand why they would be really fearful and angry and upset, but it can turn ugly, and they unleash all this resentment on those people who dress in that funny way or wear the long beards, or sometimes their skin is a different color. But this is, more properly speaking, it's bigotry than racism. You know, there's a lot of this kind of talk when the Irish came over to the Northeast massively during the potato famines and competed for those low-income jobs with the native Anglo-Saxons. There's some fierce racism there for quite a while with with cartoons showing the Irish with these very ape-like characteristics. That sound familiar? But the skin color wasn't any different. But that was bigotry. Now, actual racism, it seems to me, requires that you have a system of some kind that explains in logic that I don't think most of us would buy, but I hope we wouldn't, but there's a kind of rationale for why one race is superior to another race. This isn't just a kind of knee-jerk reflex because you're in competition with these people. It's something that you've thought out and you've constructed a kind of philosophy. This is why we're superior to these people down here. But you know what? And I really want to stress this point. When you're talking about this kind of real racism that's undergirded by a kind of ideology, a lot of times the people up here have a paternalistic, condescending attitude to those down here, such that they treat them like little children or like little pets. You know, like they're little dogs or cats. They almost have a sort of loving attitude toward them. They look out after them. They do things for them that these people can't do for themselves because they're just really not smart enough to make a go of it in this difficult, complex world. So that's you're not talking about hoods and torches and nooses in the middle of the night. You're talking about people up here who are doing things for the pathetic little people down here of the inferior race. Now, that, a lot of times, is the most legitimate racism that you'll ever find. It's not just bigoted hatred that might change if economic circumstances improve. This is embedded in a kind of ideology. So I leave you to draw your own conclusions about that with respect to our current cultural and political scene. Since this whole series is about slanders and slurs, I come now to the unpleasant point that I guess is what I really need to emphasize here. Everything that I've said up until now, I think, has been aimed at showing you that, first of all, the idea of race is practically null from a scientific point of view. And a lot of times when we talk about racism, it's not really, it's just bigotry, and it's something that it's because circumstances are really making us fearful and uneasy. But what I strongly object to and resent is having the word racist flung at me because of this. That is actually racist for someone to call me a racist because of my skin color. I can't do anything about this. I was born this way. But for someone to size me up and put me in a box, and I'm a career academic. I just retired a couple of years ago. You can't go through academia and not have somebody throw this word at you. For someone to judge me because of this surface, who doesn't know me, who doesn't know anything about my past, who doesn't know anything about my parents, my childhood, the difficulties I encountered growing up through the school days and so forth, and all of those things can be much more influential on the individual's formation than something like skin color. The situation in your household with the parents who raised you is, I think, infinitely more important to what happens to you on the inside than how society treats you because you look a certain way. Well, don't look at me, don't look at my surface, and then read me the riot act because I have this problem and this problem and this problem. There's nothing I can do about it because I'm just born that way and it's in my DNA. I'm white and I'm a male on top of it. Why don't you add that I'm getting old? That makes me just, can't teach an old dog new tricks. So I guess I'm really a sorry piece of work. Just slap me in the face. That's like walking up to somebody and spitting in his face. And you're doing it for what? Because of the way that he looks. And you're calling him a racist when your behavior is the most exemplary kind of despicable. It's not even paternalistic racism. It's stupid, crude, impolite, vulgar bigotry. And my last word on that is just that it shouldn't, I think the way to respond is not even to respond. I don't talk to people like that. I turn my back on them and walk away. They're not my friends. I don't know them. If they want to come up to me later and apologize, then okay, then we can build on something from there. But don't spit on my face and then come back to me later and expect me to have a conversation with you. You don't deserve that.